First real estate writer and economic development writer for the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. Been in this role for about 3 or 4 years. I transitioned out of the banking and finance role, so I was covering the downfall of commercial real estate during the collapse starting in 09, 10, and then now I've been covering the upswing, which is actually more fun. I got a little depressing there for a while when all you're writing about is foreclosures on the residential and commercial end, or projects going under or being repossessed. So what they asked me to talk about was a little bit about what's happening in commercial real estate, some of the hottest projects going on right now. And what I'm sort of fascinated by in my role is I think about 25 years in the future, and if you look at the projections by the Atlanta Regional Commission, we're going to add 2.5 million people by 2040. And if you're already, you got 85, well, not 85 now, it's the bridge, but any of our freeways or any of our major thoroughfares, you have to wonder a little bit where we're going to put all those people. And actually, that's what I'm fascinated about. And so I do think we're going to densify. I think suburbs are going to densify. I think in town's got plenty of room to densify. This is a city that has retained a lot of its suburban and rural character in the exurbs, but we're not, we don't have green land forever. So it is going to force us to get closer to the city, closer to the core. That's going to create different building types. It's going to create challenges, because you're going to have to go up as opposed to out. But I do think that means that as we're adding these people, it's a tremendous amount of opportunity for the real estate community and those associated with it. So I read something a few months ago about some of the things that I was going to be watching the year ahead. And you may have noticed we have some stadium projects that are out there. Braves Stadium just opened. Mixed-use development is still sort of a bit of a work in progress as they're getting, they've got the plaza and the immediate restaurants open, and they're opening the apartments and some of the more specialty retail around it. And they will have, the Braves will eventually have phases 2 and 3 around it as well. You probably know they bought the Genuine Parks campus that I think they're still trying to determine whether that's going to be parking or development there. And then keep carrying it. There's room for more density on that particular side as well. Falcon Stadium, they just got the structural steel done for the roof, though we'll have to see if the roof opens as they planned. They seem to be confident that they did push back the opening of that stadium to, I think it was August. And then the other stadiums we have underway, Phillips Arena is going to have a redevelopment, and then the Hawks have been talking about building some type of mixed-use development in and around the area of Phillips Arena. Turner just sold the Omni, their portion of the Omni Hotel. I think CNN Center itself is right for redevelopment. Maybe keeping the building in place, but making them all different around it. You have a lot of surface parking lots in the general area of Phillips Arena that I think may see some change over the next few years as they look to see if there's some way to bring life and energy to the streets, not just when conventions and concerts and the Hawks and are playing, but if they can do this sort of thing year-round. Georgia State, Turner Field, they've already begun construction of turning it into a football stadium. I don't know if any of you have seen images of what's happening actually within the bowl of the stadium, but it's actually pretty profound. And it's going to be a multi-year process. They can play football in it today if they needed to, but they're going to begin building some grandstands in the right field area, Turner Field, turning that into a real football stadium. And the finished product, I think, will be done, I think, at the end of 2018. But they'll play through some of the construction that they're doing. Carter's talked about, their development partner there has talked about some 300 apartments, I think 500,000 square feet of retail, I don't know, 250,000 somewhere square feet of both student school space, instructional space, as well as office space for the university. And and the first project I think is going to be an 800-bed student housing development, sort of right after the downtown connector and Hank Aaron Drive. And so if you think about having 800 students there in the next few years, plus whatever 350 apartments, market rate apartments, affordable housing units, that is a tremendous amount of constant energy that you will see that hasn't been there in a decade. They're talking about reconnecting the street grid, make it a more walkable community. That corridor of Capitol Avenue is on the list of Marta's list for light rail line. How that would actually play would be more like a streetcar and getting people from Georgia State to the southern campus there. I don't know, but you talk about putting transit, the stadium on transit, talk about that area on transit, talk about having a permanent student population as well as professors, staffers living there. That area to me becomes very, very intriguing as opposed to having a baseball stadium where there's activity 81 days a year and nothing for those folks to do before or after a game, and then they leave and the area is sort of like a vacuum. So I think that's a particularly intriguing piece of property down there as well. Not begun with stadiums. Gwinnett is talking about mixed-use development around Gwinnett Arena and the Energy Center. North American, I think, has been tapped to be the ones to sort of plan that out. What that will look like, that is still pretty much in the air, but it seems that like every community is trying to find a stadium to create a driver development. They sometimes have a bit of a mixed track record, but that's the way we're going. Some of the other drivers, I think, of the real estate economy going forward is also going to be the investment, the public side investments in transportation. You saw Fulton County approve a $600 million sales tax for roads and bridges. The city of Atlanta approved a $300 million road and bridge tax, and the city of Atlanta also approved a $2.5 billion water tax that will be carried out over 42 years. We still don't know the project list for the city for Martin. I mean, we have a general idea. They talked about rail along the Beltline, they talked about potentially extending rail along what they call the Clifton corridor between sort of the Armory Yards, Lindbergh area to CDC, and perhaps the CAB will join in to build the other side of that development. But what would rail along the Beltline do for that area? I think it'd be a slow-moving rail, it'd be more streetcar-like than it would be rapid, heavy motor rail. But if you, I was just in Boston last week, and if you ride the Green Line in Boston, that's sort of a hybrid streetcar slash light rail line. And I went to Menlo Park, and we had 35,000 people in that stadium, and we were able to clear out of the park within 15 minutes. But most people were taking light rail, so it was actually more effective than you might think, provided it's in a dedicated guideway, where it can go under interchanges as opposed to getting stuck in traffic like it is on street road. But it actually was a pretty effective way of clearing the stadium. And if you can make development an actual commuting option through, rapid transit, that area begins to continue to densify. You've seen New City talking about the what's called Murder Burger, the development there with the new Burger office building on top of it. Georgia Power looking to sell their site there along, what is that? That's right there by 2 Overland Licks. I'm trying to think of the name of the street, Ralph McGill. I mean, you're talking about a 14-acre site there that potentially could go, put 1 million square feet of development there between hotel, residential, office. And you think about that corridor and 1 million square feet, perhaps, in that area is just a tremendous amount of potential development. Some of the other projects that I'm sort of tracking would be, you don't really think about it, but if you take a Google Earth view of Midtown, for all the developments happening in Midtown, we still have tons of available land in Midtown. It's just very expensive. And who's going to make the bet to, say, go office there, or do, a lot of the bets right now have been, of course, high-rise residential rental. Then you've had the wrapped apartment buildings, but at some point there's got to be office there. You have Hines looking potentially to go spec at Atlantic Station. You have Seelig looking to go spec perhaps there near the Art Center MARTA station. Who's going to get the money and who's going to go forward and who's going to kick it off first? We do have some condo developments, which, the C word hasn't been heard much in this cycle. I mean, it's like everything has been apartments, and this is, we saw condos, basically sit empty for several years in Buckhead and particularly on the luxury end. There's Wheeland's pretty much nearing the finish of construction for the museum project across the street from the Eye Museum, and I think that's pretty close to being sold out. You've got the project there of the New York group right across the street from the old Symphony site, or on the old Symphony site across the street from the Four Seasons. I mean, they're talking about several hundred condos. I don't know, they say they're going to fund construction on their own dime until they get to a certain level of pre-sales. They say they're going to kick off in October. We'll see. I wish them well. I'm not sure if the market is there for $1 million condos of that number. I think there is a market for $1 million condos, and I don't know if it's that number. So that's definitely one project I'll be looking at. And then I guess the other part of what I'm going to be following going forward will be Underground Atlanta, and how that development team begins to craft its vision. I mean, all we have are broad strokes for whatever's going to happen there. The transaction finally closed after almost 3 years in the pipeline, and the city taking a number of sort of Herculean efforts to get that across the finish line. We expect to hear some more specifics as we go forward probably this year on what they plan to build. They've said apartments, they've said a grocery store, which downtown Vital desperately needs. So what that will look like, we'll keep an eye on that. And then sort of a wild card in a lot of this also will be the edge cities. We're in Buckhead, but Crumpler Center, Doraville, Cumberland is booming right now around the Braves Stadium. You've seen not only the Braves project, but you've seen the tower where Synovus is going into. Open Land has another office tower in their pipeline. More apartments are headed that way. But in Doraville, you have the assembly site, which they apparently have landed Serta Simmons Bedding to move their headquarters and maybe a research facility over there. That'd be 500 jobs. I don't think it's new jobs, but it'd be 500 people now on the assembly site, along with the movie studio that's already operational. I don't know if y'all know about the movie studio that's already operating there, but I think they've gotten 2 film projects and a couple of smaller television projects. And you've got hundreds of people, crew coming in and out of that facility right now, today. And there's really not a restaurant to serve them, on the immediate site. There's Buford Highway, so they don't have to go too far. But you put a movie studio there, and a corporate campus there, and I think that area does actually have some real momentum. They're about to go to market with bonds for the infrastructure projects there, which will be the street grid and the connection to the actual Gold Line MARTA station there. So that project looks like it's about to heat up. So those are some of the big things that I'm going to be watching in this year. And I'm welcome to, if you have any questions or anything I might be able to answer.
I have 2 questions.
Yeah.
On the MARTA expansion, do you have any insight into headed north, like Alpharetta, North Fulton?
That would take a different vote.
Okay.
So the expansion that was voted on by the city of Atlanta is just within the city limits, and that's $2.5 billion for 42 years is how much they think they can generate, and then they hope to match that with federal dollars. Now some of that is up in the air right now because we don't know what the administration is going to do in terms, if they are going to match like the past administration pledged to do. So right now, Fulton wants to do a quarter penny within its boundaries in North and South Fulton. I think they would match that to 42 years. I think that would generate somewhere in the ballpark of nearly $2 billion. And the hope is that they would run some kind of rail or rapid bus to what is it? That's the above Avalon, the exit path, Windward Parkway.
Okay.
I will say that if they started digging today, it'd probably take 10 years for that to be done, and they're not going to start digging today. So you got to get the population to actually approve a sales tax pipe, and then you've got to do your other federal approvals and everything else. But that's sort of the last thing that I saw. That was what they were going for.
What about the above ground parks that they were talking about over?
Deck parks?
Yeah.
Yeah, so you have 2 of those, and I don't know if y'all follow that or not. So there's 2
two concepts for deck parks, or capping freeways here. One right here on 400, and another one downtown near the Civic Center MARTA station. Both of them are very intriguing ideas. The one in downtown would actually open up available land for development. The one here, I don't think would be as much about opening land for development, but about essentially just closing off the freeways and having a way to walk. Yes, exactly, walk along 400. I think they're both very intriguing ideas. Neither of them have much capital behind them, so that's going to be the challenge: is how do you create a funding source, a funding mechanism to actually pay for that. In Dallas, they use private donations. They created a 501c3 to manage the thing, and then they leveraged the private dollars with local match of local public dollars and then federal dollars. That one, though, was much smaller than what they're talking about, the two here.
It's been wildly successful.
It has been very successful, and it's a very neat place. I mean, if you program it correctly, you can have concerts there all the time, outdoor seating for lunch or whatever. You can have, you could make it basically a front lawn for Buckhead if you do such a thing like that, or another front lawn for downtown. But there are challenges too. And I think Denver's doing one as well right now. Philly has done one. But I want to say that particularly the one downtown, would be far larger than any of those cities have tried to pull off.
You touched on the TOD concept up in Doraville, but could you share with us your thoughts on how transit-oriented developments and the MARTA JVs that they're doing? You've got, I think, North American Properties talking about Avondale. Certainly, Chamblay's underway.
Yeah.
You've got Cousins negotiating for the platform over the Art Center station.
Yeah.
And untold millions of new square feet. How quickly do you think those things will come?
I mean,
how big of a?
I don't know how quickly it'll come. I mean, the 2 or 3 that are underway, if Columbia Residential's doing the one there at Edgewood, they're moving along fairly well. That's mostly apartment driven. There's a little bit of community that's going on there. I think those are easier to do. I mean, given the economic climate, to build residential near these stations. I mean, MARTA's been pretty deliberate about how they bring these things forward, and I think that's the right way to go about it. It's not knocking them at all. Art Center is, that one's going to be a little bit more challenging to actually build, because that's where they cut and covered the station, and so you're going to have to build, sort of up and around and do it that way. They're still, my understanding is they're still, I mean, they've named their development, but I don't think they've inked the full deal, and I don't think Cousins yet has the full spectrum of what they want to build yet, but I see them continuing to be deliberate about this. You saw what happened in Brookhaven, where they didn't get the community's buy-in. I mean, they couldn't even get it past the planning commission. So I think they are. I think they're being very deliberate. Though I do think that Cousins, and I do think the situation there at Art Center will be different in terms of, I don't know that they need zoning approval or that sort of thing. I think that likely that area already has whatever zoning they need, so you don't have that hurdle that you would in Brookhaven. But I still do think it's it's going to take a bit of time.
Yeah, Avondale Station.
I'm not familiar with that one, honestly.
It might just be the planning station.
Yeah, I'm not honestly familiar with that one. But Chambly, like you said, I mean, those buildings are already pretty much up. So
That's cool.
Certainly drive ridership.
it should. And I don't know if you saw I was on vacation last week, so I did not attend Development Day for MARTA, but I think system-wide, they've had a 20% increase in ridership on rail, with the overwhelming majority of that being in the North Metro area. I think it was, yeah, no, I mean, that's what I'm referring to.
It's a good spark for change.
And that's what I'm referring to.
Literally a spark for change.
Since the bridge collapse. And you hope that, right, you hope that is a habit. My wife works, we live in Dunwoody, she works 1 day a week at Crawford Long, and she takes MARTA every day, and she's talked about how much fuller the trains are. She gets on at Sandy Springs Station. And she hopes that too. I mean, she's taken to riding MARTA that 1 day she's down there, the other day she works in Sandy Springs. And it's made her life a lot easier since she decided not to drive, and that was 5-6 years ago. So she was sort of in the vanguard of doing that, I guess, so to speak, for some folks. But she's very helpful. The people she sees on the train now, her new faces, continue to ride.
Do they have any estimates for how sticky that ridership is going to be?
Not that I heard. I didn't attend. I just sort of had friends tell me about, someone showed me the slide deck that they had, and I think they're trying to determine that now. But you've seen employers, put signs up in the lobbies of their buildings, hey, we'll help you figure out ways, what your commute options are. I think I even saw one down here, which is great. I mean, and our paper did the same thing. So the AJC, some of you may or may not know, we're actually in Dunwoody, we're no longer at 72 Marietta. And, we had internal discussions, how do we get our people here? A lot of our employee base actually already took MARTA, because a lot of people live in town or on the south side and rode the red line up to our office. So I don't know how much our ridership increased, but for our paper, but it seems like almost everywhere I go, any office building, it was either telecommute or take MARTA. And I think that's smart. We'll see how sticky it is. I don't know.
So one of the elements that you did not address with all of the development that's going on is the transportation side of it.
Yeah.
And especially, I live in Grant Park, and there's only a few corridors across I-20.
Yes.
How is transportation being addressed with all of this real estate development?
We don't have a very great reputation of doing that.
Unfortunately, that's not the answer I'm looking for.
Other states have stronger, requirements in terms of impact and other things. Or if you go to, say, Toronto, where, if you sell a condo, you levy a $25,000 impact fee on the buyer of that condo, and those dollars have to stay in the immediate area to address infrastructure concerns. We don't have anything like that. Really, as strong as that here in Metro Atlanta. We haven't had a history of pushing for that. In Dunwoody, State Farm is building that 3 or 4 building campus there. And another developer, tried to work with the city to donate land to create another road, an alternative to Hammond Drive. I think that road will still go forward, but it'll be years later than they hope to make it happen. We're screwed. I'm sorry.
Sorry,
I just don't. I don't see.
Enjoy the zoo.
There will be some, connectivity with, not necessarily, maybe not precisely where you are with the Beltline, but, there will be some ways that people will have to evolve their commuting habits. There is sort of a theory of city planning that you make it so unbearable that people have to make other choices. And whether that's wonderful, but I don't think that's necessarily a conscious decision here. I think that's just what has organically happened as we've not invested in the infrastructure as we've added people.
We will have a Q&A once we're done also, so if you have more questions for Scott, hold those. Thank you, Scott. Sure. Next up, I guess our second keynote speaker, and Scott, I can pronounce your last name, Jordan.
Yes.
Scott is with BB&T, and he's going to talk about, I guess, the banking side and the lending side of the commercial real estate world.
Yes.
Scott Jordan.
Thank you. Appreciate it, Jeff. And thank you, all of y'all, for coming. I'm honored to be in front of you. And Berman Fink Van Horn, great firm. You should use them if you don't. So I'll pitch them in the beginning. Absolutely. That's what I'm here for. And that's on video. So Lawrence, everybody remember that. So it's nice to actually be invited to speak in a time where we're not the villains of the day. So we used to do these, and the questions would be, why did you put me out of business? And, whether it was me or not. I was speaking on behalf of the industry. So wanted to open up kind of a little bit of the mystery behind borrowing. I run a team here in Atlanta, actually mostly serving commercial and industrial borrowers. So my knowledge is not necessarily as deep in the developer space, although if you have questions around that, I can address up to a limit, probably to a dangerous point. And then I can even follow up with you afterwards with some expertise. So just give you some basics. So this is going back to like old school credit underwriting 101. The old 5 C's of credit. Anybody that's been in banking or finance at all probably remembers that in your first book when you came out of training. And the reality is they still apply in a lot of ways. The order of whether they're important and how they stack to me is always changing. I put them in an order that I find relevant to me, and I'll kind of go through that. So character is the first C. That's the people side of the business. That's management depth. That's ethics. That's how responsive you are to your banker and how your banker interacts with you, et cetera. And In my opinion, that is really what pays back loans. We saw during the recession, regardless of whether you had recourse on your debt or not, at the end of the day, strong character of borrowers was what ultimately paid us back. So, people think collateral is usually that first one, and collateral, you'll see, I've kind of put that towards the back. So capacity, that's cash flow. That's how do you pay that note on a monthly basis? When your mortgage statement comes in, how are you writing the check? Capital, that's your cushion, that's your cash, that's your backup. That's, to me, another thing I would say is incredibly important. Something that some borrowers learned the hard way in the recession, that cash was king, and that at the end of the day, those that had it survived, those that didn't went out of business. Condition. This is economics. This could be local. This could be industry. This could be national. I think that drives a lot of our broad-based policy. So our underwriting policy that affects our whole territory will be driven a lot off economic conditions. Sometimes that's even forced upon us by the feds or our local state regulators. They may say we don't. For instance, as you guys know, banks have slowed down lending on apartment complexes. Some of that has yet to really bear fruit in a negative way. But at the end of the day, the Fed saw that coming, the industry maybe sees it coming, and we've all slowed down as a result. And then collateral, so I put that last. So most people think that's all banks care about. At the end of the day, that's what you put up for your borrowing instrument. I would say that unfortunately in some instances got us paid back, some instances didn't. We actually found that sometimes if we weren't secured properly, that was a challenge. Maybe even the way we interacted with the borrower prevented our ability to go after our collateral. There are a lot of things that I think, collateral wasn't necessarily as big of a protection as we all had expected. So that's kind of the high levels. We literally think about those in some level of detail every time we're underwriting a loan. So even like a credit memo is addressing those when we're talking to our credit officers about why we should or shouldn't make the loan. I'm a big believer in the character aspect of that. That's something I think is also harder to judge without experience. It's the one thing, if you're a junior banker, when you're meeting with a prospect, it's really, really tough to gauge. We pull things like your credit report. We ask for references. We may be checking behind the scenes on you with your friends, your peers, the company you work with, et cetera, to try to get our hands around that. If you work with somebody for a long time, it's easy to affirm. So you just see how they engage, how they interact. That's a different experience with a client. With a prospect, it's really, really tough. And I would argue these are things that you might want to even analyze your bank too, like what's the character of the individual you're working with, what's the character of their management team, how do their assets look, are they stable, are they strong, do they have their own ability to repay their debts. We all saw in Georgia, Scott and I were talking about this earlier, when he first took the banking beat at the AJC, it was kind of, he said, a miserable time. All he was talking about was bank failures. That has slowed down. Ironically, though, I don't believe that should not still be something that people pay attention to. Some instances, I'm not knocking the industry, there are some of the players are in a different form or a different name, but they're still the same group that may have gone out of business. So be mindful of that. And I would definitely, if I were you, pay attention to who was strong and stable during the recession, because for one, we were able to treat borrowers with a good level of respect. We were able to ride a storm with them, get through all that as well. So it doesn't have to be about how we underwrite you. It could be how you underwrite us as well. So next thing, we're going to talk just high-level types of loans. So we've got traditional commercial mortgages that would apply to commercial and industrial, or apply to commercial real estate. That's your standard balloon or term loan. Generally, you're going to look at, on an owner-occupied property, anywhere between, if you're using SBA, as little as 10% down. If you're using conventional, somewhere in the 15 to 25% range. And then on commercial real estate, really the project dictates that. So I think depending on the asset class, like the cash flow of the property, et cetera, a lot of that drives ultimately what the equity requirement is on a commercial real estate project. And we see deals now, sizing at 30, 35, 40% equity. That's an interesting change, because that's kind of what got us in trouble in the recession. Not only BB&T, but the banking industry in general was lending too high on assets. And so you see that sizing. Ironically, though, in commercial industrial space, we still do relatively high loan-to-value lending, because that industry in general, unless you're affiliated with real estate or housing, has been relatively stable. Not a lot of change in that industry, a lot of misnomers out there. Second thing I mentioned was SBA. We've got a couple of programs available to us, the banking industry does, and there's some other kind of niche programs, but I won't hit them. The 7(a) program as well as the 504 program. My personal belief is that 504 is a better product for real estate. Some banks have a differing opinion of that. 7(a) is a form of ability to get long terms, up to 25 years, also do a 10% down. To me, they come with higher fees, more volatile interest rates, and a really, in my opinion, up there, no SBA reps here, very burdensome process. 504, I personally believe that because there's a bank involved, the bank actually does the first mortgage, the CDC and the SBA do the second mortgage, you tend to see a more efficient process. Now, everybody has a different SBA experience. Some of you may say, I don't believe you on that. I've been through one, it was a pain. But I would say in general, that's kind of the difference. And then you have a lot of other vehicles for borrowing. So, you know, Dave Chambliss knows, I mean, private equity, mezzanine, there are all kinds of forms of borrowing that banks and non-banks provide. That has actually gained steam a lot during the recession. So, honestly, we are probably the lowest risk form of lending. You don't go to your bank for the high risk asset class. You don't go to your bank for a startup. I mean, these are things that maybe we participated in the past and maybe will again, but it's really a tough thing, I think, for banks to lend on it because we don't charge a lot of money. In fact, we're capped on how much we can charge. And at the end of the day, we have to hold those assets because it's not our money that we're lending out. At the end of the day, we're lending our depositors, our customers, our shareholders. We're trying to protect them from what the kind of decisions we make. So at the end of the day, though, what I find refreshing about it, it has opened up the door for a lot of different types of vehicles for people to explore as an intro to lending, a bridge to bank financing. We partner sometimes with those lending sources as well, so they might provide the equity or be in the back end where we're senior and they're subordinate, and we might be able to pull off an instrument together. I know our bank, we actually have a division that does that type of lending in certain asset classes, but in general, those are like high level, the types of lending vehicles that exist on real estate. Then here's like the part I really wanted to kind of get into was borrowing tips. So if you're going to a bank, and my suggestion would be start this process early. Don't wait till the transaction comes at hand. I think that's probably the biggest mistake a borrower might make is they start interviewing banks when they've identified what they're ready to do. So usually you're rushed. Your bank's not going to have all your information. They might end up actually giving you their worst terms, and you wouldn't necessarily have time to underwrite your bank. So is this a partner for me? Is this a bank I want to be with long term? So just a couple tips. Articulating your request. Be very upfront with your hot buttons. I think that's something some people hold all the cards. They don't necessarily want the bank to know what they want. I'm not going to tell you what rate I want. I'm not going to tell you what recourse level I want. I'm going to have you mind read me, and then you might actually be excluding a good bank from the mix in that interview process. So I believe you don't have to share all your cards, but give ranges or say, of all the things that matter to me, these matter the most. And the other stuff I'm a little more flexible on. That allows your bank to customize for you, and maybe your bank may be reading you wrong. They may think interest rate is all that matters to you, and you actually may only care about recourse and may pay more for that. So I do think that's a really good thing. Your hot buttons you should always be upfront with. If you're buying a project, obviously we need certain documentation, so I'll just give some high-level stuff, you know, your letter of intent, your purchase contract. I do think a business plan can be relevant, but I will be honest, I'm looking at you, Dave, because I know you get a lot of them too. I have stacked more business plans in a drawer over the years that I've never read. Our underwriters never read them at all. In fact, if I forward it to an underwriter, first thing they're going to say is, that's a lot of fluff. I don't even understand it. They all show that you make a profit in the first year. They're just tough. Yeah, it's kind of just the reality. I would keep them concise. I do think, though, they can articulate what you're looking for. So there's nothing wrong with having a pitch book, but I would keep it brief, leverage a legal partner, leverage a CPA, somebody to help you provide one that actually a bank might read, an executive summary that really states and articulates your request without going overboard. Because we get them where they're like this thick, and I actually feel bad because somebody probably paid for that. And in general, bankers don't read them. Just being honest. Having your financials ready, I think having a package kind of always available in most banks, like 2 to 3 years of financials. So, you know, that could be corporate financials, personal financials of the sponsors, you know, tax returns, audits, etc. I will say, since the recession has happened, and this is one of those items I think most borrowers have not all adapted to, some have, is that banks lean heavily now on CPA-prepared financial statements. So we used to lend on tax returns, company-prepared financial statements. In some instances, we do on smaller projects, but even ironically for real estate development projects, which used to never require that unless they were, $100 million projects, that's a real big requirement, some forced by the feds, some forced by the fact we learned that we were given documents that weren't necessarily either accurate or ethically prepared or in accordance with GAAP. So I would suggest if you know somebody that owns a business, they should be graduating towards a higher level of financial statements. So moving towards a compilation or a review or an audit. And if there's an accountant in the room, they're probably thanking me right now for getting them some business. But if tenants are involved in your project, obviously we want to have as many details as we can. Rent roll, financial statements, leases if you have them, and details on the tenant. So sometimes we get a package on a deal that has a tenant mixed to it and we know nothing besides the name. So, if you know things, but, some of the underwriting items I gave you earlier, if you know the character of these tenants, how long they've been with you, what you know about them personally, et cetera, those are all relevant details. And unless they're credit rated, so like Walgreens, for instance, we don't know much about them. So we're leaning on you for that. And we might jump to conclusions if we have to underwrite based on what we do or do not know. So listing all your debts. So that's direct and contingent and all the other stuff that we may or may not know about. So I think be upfront with that, share everything you have, we'll get a full understanding of your picture, we can look at you globally. I think your resume, whether it's verbally articulated or written down, is a very important thing as well. We need to know what your experience is. So if you're a doctor and you're building a new startup practice, explain if you've done that before. If you're an apartment developer, walk through the types of apartment developments that you've done, what your depth of experience is. And if you don't have experience, be honest with that too. I think in some instances we can get through that, but I do think it helps to articulate that. And then, documenting your liquidity. Do you have the cash, as I mentioned earlier? That matters a lot. I think we love to see that as a fallback. And then these next two things are really kind of just general. Highlight your strengths, be open, be honest, be proud. So if you've got a good business, share that. I think that's a very good thing. You should share all the reasons why you think you are the premier real estate investor, the premier manufacturer, premier law firm, whoever you are. But also highlight your opportunities. You never want your bank to find those on their own or jump to conclusions. So sometimes we'll see an item that maybe you didn't bring up, so I'll just use an example, a tax lien. You never mentioned it. We find it on our own. We start thinking, wow, they don't pay their taxes. They might not pay us. You might have gone through a divorce. You might have had an odd bankruptcy in the past. There could be all these reasons why it started, and you should articulate that up front. I would say highlight your opportunities very early. No surprises. Lenders do not like surprises, and we sometimes will pull deals last minute because of those surprises. And that could be very arduous, I would say, for you as a borrower to go through all of that and in the 11th hour find out that something in your past is why we weren't able to lend to you. And in some instances, those actually are found out post-commitment. So a bank might actually say, hey, we're going to lend money to you. But if you read the commitment, it'll say if we find something in a background search, we could yank the commitment. That could be a real disheartening thing in the 11th hour. Sometimes it'll cost you money. I do think you should interview your banks, as I mentioned earlier. I think you should do that early. You should do that often. I don't think there's anything wrong, and my boss would probably not like me to say this to no other bankers. I think if one calls you, take their call, particularly if they work with an interesting institution or they say something relevant that you want to hear about. I would only probably have 2 or 3 that you keep in your circle. We bid on a deal the other day that had 13 banks involved. The CFO literally looked like his head was going to explode. And I'm not sure the reason behind it, but what was interesting, and they were more confused. They were more like, I don't even think they knew where to lean at the end of it. And then ironically, they ended up settling on like 2 or 3 banks in the final cut anyway. So I would say just cut through all that. We're all more similar than we are not alike. I do think we have nuances though, and I think that's something you should also look at. I do think look for cultural fit. What's their servicing model like? Is it local? Is it national? Are you going to get a banker that actually is with you for a while? And that would be for underwriting as well as for servicing. Lender appetite. What's your appetite for my type of business, for my type of project? Do we like this type of industry, et cetera? Ability to grow. The worst thing ever is for me to make the first loan to a client and not be able to make the second loan. So I would say up front when you're interviewing, go, what's your legal lending limit? You know, how much do you lend to the average borrower in my industry? What, you know, those types of general questions. I think at the end of the day, there's nothing worse than being constrained by a partner that you thought with all the right mix up until that point, when they couldn't do that next deal. Sometimes it's a benefit to those of us on the prospecting side of the house. And then depth of products, services. Can they service a lot of what I do? You know, are they going to be able to be my full banking provider? I think that is very relevant. You will learn that will command you higher privileges within a bank, a better price. So, lack of a better term, you get better leverage the more you do with a bank. That's just reality. Can they give you market intelligence? Can they give you relevant industry data? Can they benchmark you against your competitors? Not all banks can do that. Some can do it very, very well. Some are starting to do it. That's something we see a lot in the industry now, partly because the economy's been sluggish and borrowing has actually been down, so we're trying to find more ways to be long-term relevant. And I think our industry as a whole is changing dramatically for the better in that regard. And can they help you grow the business? What's their network like? Can they connect you with others that could give you business? You know, if Lawrence and I work together, can I introduce Lawrence to other clients for his business? And at the end of the day, I think that's very relevant. And I think these are things you should ask. And that's why I would say do this early instead of right as the transaction is coming up. Always be thinking ahead. You know, don't be worried about the transaction at hand. Think of it your partner long term. Also, I would tell you, and I learned this myself, you know, both as a borrower as well as a lender. At the end of the day, you know, you want to have a partners with you for a long time. I've learned that I will pay more for that. You know, at the end of the day, I think sometimes price is exactly what it is. You pay for a cheap car, you get a cheap car. Pay for a cheap bank, you get a cheap bank. I mean, that's just reality. That's all I've got. Sorry, it's not as cool as the industry data for Atlanta, but probably not as cool as the legal advice you're going to get for free from Lawrence.
Thank you.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
So last, we have Lawrence Kasman. Lawrence is a shareholder in Berman Fink Van Horn. And Lawrence's practice is corporate, primarily commercial real estate. Lawrence is anxious to get going. I'm going to zoom out. Just keep Lawrence is excellent at what he does. Lawrence gave me a bio to read, so I'll give it a real quick read. Represents private and institutional lenders and investors, property owners, builders and developers, landlords, tenants, retail, office, industrial. And he's also a business lawyer, which I can say that for all of us at BFD, we may be litigators, employment lawyers, corporate lawyers, but we're all business lawyers at the end of the day. So Lawrence, come up here and tell us about your practice and what you do.
I want to thank Scott for coming and giving us an idea of what's hot in the real estate market. Now everybody knows where to go and look for your next project. And I want to thank Scott Jordan for taking the time and telling us to go spend the time, buy a new suit and show up at the bank. And
no suits required.
So you found your project and you found your loan and you've gotten the commitment and now you need the money for your capital stack to finish your deal. And the money is always the challenge. Where am I going to go to get it? How am I going to find it? And I always say there's three things you need, or I should say you need one of three things. You need money, or you need skill, or you need time. If you've got money, just go hire somebody that is going to invest your money for you. If you've got skill, go find somebody that wants to invest in you. And if you've got time, go learn a skill for go earn the money. So at the end of the day, let's talk about, I've handed out a checklist. Unfortunately, raising money raises more questions than it does answers. And the list that I've given you is something I did in my spare time to basically make you start to think about all the issues that need to be addressed before you go forward with your project, before you pull together your capital stack, and before you take advantage of the opportunity that's presented in front of you. I can't answer these questions for you. These questions take time, they take effort, they take preparation, they take those uncomfortable sit-down meetings with your investor and your partner and your developer, whichever side of the table you might be on, and you really got to do what Scott suggested, which is come clean, right? Talk about your background, talk about the project, talk about what works, talk about what's not going to work, talk about the competition. If we're going to go to the Braves Stadium, we're going to build an apartment complex, how are people going to get in and out? What about public transportation, right? Have these discussions up front so that there's no unknowns, I guess, at the end of the day that cause friction. So I'm going to sort of follow along. The highlighted issues are what I feel are the important points to follow the money. All right, so try to stay up. If we have questions at the end, I'm going to try to leave. I don't have a lot of time, but I'm going to leave 5 or 10 minutes at the end just so we can ask questions and circle back. So who are the players? So let's say you're going to develop an apartment complex and you decide that Cumberland is the right market. You're going to need, if you're the developer, you're going to need money. So you're going to go to investors, and those investors are going to tell you, or sometimes you're going to tell them, depending on how strong the project is, they're going to say, I want voting control. Or you know what, I'm not interested in voting control, I just want to be a non-voting member, or what I call an economic interest holder. The latter is simply someone who's going to put their money in, let you make the decisions, or let the other members of the LLC make the decisions, and sit back and wait for their return. On the voting side, a lead investor is going to want more control. And the percentage control that they get may not be consistent with the amount of money they're putting in. I may invest 20% of the capital stack, but I may only get 10% of the return, and I may want 30% of the voting control. So consider that just because I put in X percent of the money, that doesn't transition into the amount of voting control or the amount of distributions that I might get at the end of the day. What form will that money take? So of course, just like lending, as Scott alluded to, there are a lot of different opportunities to bring money into a deal. When the market got tight, all different kinds of investors and structures showed up. But typically, you're going to have, I guess, 4 different types. You're going to have traditional loans, where an investor is going to come in and say, look, we'll lend the company money, we're just looking for X percent internal rate of return, we just want our money back. And for that loan, they may take a small percentage of the equity, right, in addition to their loan on the debt. In addition to the repayment of the debt. It could take the form of equity. Equity is traditionally more expensive. You may have to give an investor more of the deal in order to get their money in, obviously because they're taking on more risk. Is your investor just coming in and providing the strength of their balance sheet in the form of a guarantee? Many times, and this comes up a lot more than I used to see, but people have the money, but they don't have the credit. They don't have the capital, right? They don't have the wherewithal to be able to substantiate a $10 million loan or $15 million loan. So they go out in the marketplace and they're looking for someone with money and with credit and with capital that can basically just stand behind the project. And I know when it comes to the banking decision, that may be the linchpin that gets you over the hump. If it's a loan, is it in the form of convertible debt? Can that loan be converted into equity either by the developer or the investor at some point in the future, depending on the project goes? And then, does that investor want a preferred return? In other words, is that investor going to get, in addition to their percentage, are they going to get on their equity a guaranteed internal rate of return on the money they've invested? Next, now you've pulled the money and everything's going to be great, except that down the road it's possible that the budget that you prepared isn't so great. And you might need additional capital. Or there was some specific issue in the deal that you did not anticipate. So now you need additional capital. And you're going to look to your investor and say, hey, you know what, we need more money. And the investor is going to look at you and say, you know what, I've invested all I'm willing to invest. And you as the developer say, you know what, I don't have any more money, right? And if you don't look into the crystal ball and say, you know what, in the future we might need more money, and how's that money going to come in, what's going to happen is you're going to get crammed down going forward. Because that investor is going to come to you and say, look, you know what, if I have to put in additional money, that's fine. I can do it in the form of a loan to you. I can do it in the form of additional equity, but I'm going to dilute your interest. And if I do it in the form of a loan, in the former example, then what's going to happen when you can't pay me back? Because the project's not doing as well as we all expected. Do I get to cram down your equity? Do I get to push you out as manager and take over the project? So these are issues that you've got to think of. A lot of times I see now where the investors are requiring that developers up to a certain percentage over the original budget, they will require that the developer put in the money. So let's say it's a $2 million project, the first $100,000 over $2 million budget, they may require the developer put in. Or they may require the developer put in a disproportionate amount of that, of the money that's required over and above the budget, simply because if I'm the investor, I bought into a deal based on a terrific sheet that you showed me, right? And now it's not looking as good as we all anticipated. Decisions in your operating company. What about voting control? Who's going to have voting rights over day-to-day decisions? Usually the developer will be the manager of the company, the developer will operate the deal, the investors sit back, they don't want any part of it. But what happens when it comes time to sell the asset? What happens when it comes time to refinance the original A&D or construction loan? What happens if the whole company needs to be dissolved and wound up? What happens if you need to add new members or add new equity? Who's going to make those decisions? Typically, the investor is going to say, you know what, forget about the percentages. Either I'm going to make this decision or I'm not in. Or maybe the investor says, you know what, we're going to acquire supermajority or majority, and that investor has that control. So as the developer, be wary of what types of decisions your investor wants to make and what types of decisions that you can control and how that will affect your ability to operate the company and make it successful. And then the last thing I'm going to cover, because we're kind of running out of time, but I'm glad to, of course, talk about anything here, is how you're going to get the money out, right? We talked about how you're going to get the money in. Now you got to worry about how the money's going to come out. And there's two ways that the money's going to come out of a typical real estate deal. It's going to come in the form of net operating income in an operating business, let's say an apartment complex, or it's going to come in the form of a capital transaction, either through a large insurance settlement or a sale of the project. In the first example, net operating income, typically your investor is going to say, I want to get my preferred return out first. So let's say that investor has a 10% return. They're going to get their 10% first. And then the rest of the money is going to be distributed pari passu based on their proportion of the investment. And that's going to be distributed to all the members as the money comes in until everybody's capital account is reduced to zero, right? In a perfect world, in a perfect project, net operating income will pay the preferred return, take everybody's capital down to zero, and then everybody's just enjoying profit. But that's not always the case. Usually everybody's in it for the ultimate end game, which is sell the property. And at the time you sell the property, this is when the developer, the tables turn, and the developer has more control over the distributions. Because if you get your preferred return out, and you get paid back your initial capital plus any additional capital, well, I put the deal together as the developer. And I want to make sure that I'm rewarded heavily because, you know what, I started from zero and I brought it all the way to success. So the developer is now going to take a percentage that is more significant, obviously, than their capital contribution, because the developer is going to be rewarded for their sweat equity in the deal, right? At the end of the day, all these decisions, everything you talk about when it comes to forming your company, going to get the loan, establishing the capital stack, making sure that the decisions are forward-thinking, it all comes down to planning, it all comes down to real and open and frank discussions about your background, about the deal, about what you need. Scott made a very good point, which is don't hold back. Don't sit there and wait for someone to come and say, this is the deal we want, and then you decide how it's going to be. You put the deal you want on the table first, provided you're not negotiating against yourself, and then say, you know what, this is the deal I want to work with. Can you work with me? Because just like the bank, you want a bank that's going to stand by you, you want a bank maybe has some experience in the industry. The money is not just the value. It's the experience. It's the person that can come up with additional money if the project gets challenged. Because at the end of the day, if you're putting the deal together, you want to see it get to success. I want to thank everybody for coming. I really do appreciate it. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak. I'm honored to have you come and speak. Scott, it's always great to see you as well. Thank you so much. And if anybody has questions for any of us, we'll go ahead and take them next.
Are there any questions for any of the three? Hopefully y'all can hang out for a couple of minutes. There's a question in the back.
Yeah, and a question for Scott. In reference to collateralization of an asset.
Yes.
as a bank, what do you see as your preferred 2 or 3 assets?
So, obviously, the higher preference would be towards the most liquid investments. So, I mean, banks love cash collateral. We don't get it very often, but, more equity and/or cash collateral, that would probably be like number one. Owner-occupied real estate is probably high on most banks' priority lists. Some of that's because it fared very well in the recession. Tend to have more cooperative borrower guarantors. Sometimes their whole life is on that deal. And then probably those investor-type deals would be third. Now, if you're talking to a bank that only specializes in that, those orders could be out of whack. I mean, for us, that's probably how we think. The project really dictates the amount of equity required, and, we size deals based on cash flow and other things. So, I mean, I hate to say it depends, but it kind of depends a little bit.
The 2 spots.
The bearded one or the non-bearded one, right? Sorry.
Speculative industrial office development.
What do you typically look for as a pre-lease commitment before you will fund it? What percentage?
Wow, so that is definitely an it depends question, and that's slightly out of my area of expertise. But what I can tell you is we have actually done some specs with no pre-leasing recently. All depends on the demand of the market. So that thing I talked about, economies, if we know a market, well, for instance, if like Fulton Industrial is crowded right now, there's that one lot that's out there, and somebody builds a spec, we know based on trend it's going to fill up. So we might not care if we have a really good sponsor or a good equity, et cetera. A lot of what we're looking at is, and I'm not going to name client names, but we might be the one I mentioned earlier. This firm has done it time and time and time again. We trust their ability to do it again. So predictability is probably part of that. Yeah. But if it's, you're going to build in Carroll County, middle of nowhere, that sort of thing, we probably need to have a really strong potential tenant coming in. You probably should be negotiating with John Deere or some other firm we know is going to be a good tenant for that type of property, if that makes sense.
Yes.
Lawrence, so we have shareholders. I typically will evaluate operating agreements and the event of death or disability of the shareholder. How often are you sort of, how common is it?
That's really good.
On something like that, you see like discounted value to shares.
So it's going to be different with your liability company and an operating business versus a real estate deal. So in an operating company, you're going to spend a lot of time on death and disability and how the shares are going to transfer and what the valuation is going to be and how they're going to go out as the company insurance on those shares. In a real estate deal, most investors are concerned about death or disability of the manager, which is the developer. Short of that, 9 times out of 10, parties are going to agree that upon death or disability of a investor member, their voting interest is going to go away, and their economic interest is going to pass to their heirs.
Because of the short nature of the
Because of the short nature, because they're not involved in the day-to-day decision-making, they're not active operators in the company, they're just looking to secure their investment. Likewise, a real estate company is not going to, I'm just talking about a real estate deal company, right? You're going to do with that apartment complex. They're not going to worry about carrying insurance on the value of the investor's interest, for example, right? So basically, they're going to transfer that dollar value to the heirs and let them sit on it until the project is finished. They're not going to allow that voting component to transfer. Right? On the manager side, different story. There's a manager dies, then there's going to be provisions as far as how they're going to get bought out, who can step in as the manager, usually it's the lead investor, et cetera.
Were you also asking about, in those instances, death disability, was the interest at the buyout discounted?
So in real estate deals, I don't see that, where it gets discounted, unless it's the manager that's, the manager that dies or is disabled, because then there might be some kind of valuation because they're not putting in sweat.
And also, just if I can add to it, sometimes if there's a for-cause event, if the manager's swindling money, and the manager gets removed in that event, then potentially there could be a buyout and that price may be discounted over what it would have been otherwise. But it's normally not death or disability, but something that somebody did wrong, that somebody did bad, but fraud, something like that.
And then you mentioned large insurance settlement as ways to dissolve the deal. When you say that, what do you mean?
You have an insurance payout because your apartment complex that was 90% built gets wiped out by a tornado and you're not going to build. You pay off the bank, and then whatever money is remaining gets distributed to the investors, and you wind up and dissolve the company.
Awesome.
It's interesting.
Lawrence, if you got a supermajority interest in the company, would you still insert the shotgun agreement into that agreement? Would you address that as part of your operating agreement?
So we don't see too many shotgun provisions in real estate companies. In companies where parties have equal bargaining power and equal have their position, then you see shotgun provision more commonly. You can probably speak to
Yeah.
how often you see it in
There's-
an operating business scenario.
Shotguns, for those that might not know, it's a forced buyout. One person makes an offer to the other party has to accept it or bounce it back, and you're guaranteed of separating. It's not an easy answer to give in a supermajority situation. Is it still something you want to have a shotgun? It is so deal specific, depending upon.
Would you be better off keeping it off if you've got a supermajority agreement?
It depends. Again, I mean, if you've got a lot more money than the other person, maybe it's a good thing. It's an easy way to get them out if it's played properly. If the other person's got a much deeper pocket than you do, maybe not. They can be much more aggressive in the offer, and if you can't bounce it back at them. So again, being supermajority should give you tremendous control. So maybe in that instance, shotgun's not a great idea.
I might add, there was a real estate transaction scenario where, let's say the developer has less capital than the investor. It's going to move the real estate developer to make sure that there's a period of time during which that buy-sell cannot be executed. So maybe there's a 3-year standstill before anybody can buy or sell their shares, because you don't want that investor who has a strong capital position to be able to take advantage of you project.
I think everybody is gonna hang out. Jeff, can you, go ahead, Jeff.
Just a comment there on that last question. The developer is the dude that's going to make the deal work and get through completion. I don't think you're going to see the lender allow a provision for a minority investor to take the developer out.
Did everybody hear that? So in front of each of you, there is a form that we have prepared, and we would really appreciate you just taking a minute and looking at it. And if there is a topic that you feel like would be of interest, we'd like to know that. Our goal is to try to present things that are timely and are of interest to a group like you all. We truly appreciate y'all coming out on a rainy Friday morning.
I just want to make sure that everyone has parking, so I'm going to stand outside and hand in all of take care of there's crowds and let me know how to do it.
So again, thank you all for coming. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Have a good day.